Welcome to History 325. I'm Eric Christensen, and most of you know me. I think you've taken classes with me before, but I think there's two of you who have not, so I wanted to make sure you got to see me this week before coming to class on Monday. Hopefully, since you're looking at this video, you've figured out how to find this video on Blackboard, and you've figured out how to find the syllabus. Both of those things are important. Obviously, and I wanted to make sure that you can feel comfortable with Blackboard this week because we're going to use Blackboard a lot for this hybrid course. Finding the videos will be important on the days that we're not meeting. There won't always be a video posted by me, but there sometimes will be. Other times I'll post a PowerPoint presentation, other times links to online content. But before we get too far into the semester, I wanted to make sure you could find a video when I do post one. So that's really why I'm doing this today. Most of this stuff could wait until Monday. There's a syllabus on Blackboard, and the main thing that I need you to do soon is to buy the books, to order the books. The books that I asked the campus bookstore to purchase for you are the first three: Ellen Schrecker's The Age of McCarthyism, A Brief History with Documents. Some of you have probably used these kind of document readers before. Those of you who took 324 with me in the fall, we used the Harlem Renaissance reader. This is a similar one that focuses on McCarthyism and anti-communism and communism more generally. We'll be using that to read about communism and anti-communism in the 40s and 50s, and then we'll be using it, you'll be using it individually to write short research papers using the documents that are contained in those books. The second book is Allison Clark's Tupperware, The Promise of Plastic in 1950s America. Everybody knows about Tupperware, I think. Tupperware, of course, these days there's a lot of competitors on the market, but Tupperware is the original plastic food storage container. Originally, until very recently, sold only through home sales. Tupperware parties were a major feature of the domestic scene in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. And I think only in the 2000s did Tupperware start selling its products directly through stores. Tupperware, seems like a pretty uninteresting topic probably on the surface, but I first read this book now about a dozen years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, and it gets into a lot of interesting things about 1950s America, and there's chapters on the plastics side and the kind of the science and technology side. There are chapters on women and gender in the 1950s, chapters on suburbanization, on business, and it all kind of connects together in some really interesting ways. I find it just to be a really interesting and enjoyable book, surprisingly interesting book, and so I think you will too. It's also not very long, which has its advantages for us. The other book that I asked the bookstore to get was the Alice Amsden book, Escape from Empire, The Developing World's Journey Through Heaven and Hell. The title might not seem like it has a lot to do with our course, but of course one of the major stories of the United States post-1945 is that it's the major world power, and it has influence and impact all over the globe. And third world countries are often where that impact is most clearly felt, most directly felt. During the Cold War in particular, the Cold War battle between the USSR and the United States takes place in third world countries for the most part. And so this book, though, takes a broader view of what American empire can mean and really focuses as much on the economics of the soft American empire as the military might behind the hard American empire. And she distinguishes between the early American empire and the later American empire, which we'll get back to later on. It's the author won a lot of prizes. She was a professor at MIT, now deceased, until relatively recently was a professor at MIT, And the book got a lot of praise. It's not a history book. It's really more of a political science and economics book, and because of that, there are times when the writing, doesn't flow as well as I think most historians' writing does. But there's just so much in there that's interesting about this period of 1945 to the present for the United States and the larger world that I couldn't resist trying it out this semester. And then the last book, which I did not ask the bookstore to buy, is James Patterson's The Eve of Destruction, How 1965 Transformed America. And I wanted to have us read a book on the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, and this one I thought was ideal because, again, it's not terribly long, it's very well told, it's an easy read, it's a narrative structure. His focus on 1965 in the title is a little disingenuous because he starts, of course, a little before that, and then there's kind of a post-1965 ending. But really, he zeroes in on this mid-1960s time frame when everything changes. And he's right about that, of course, that we think of the 60s as the decade in which all these things happen, but of course, we're really talking about the late 1960s, that sure, some things happened in the early 60s, but when we talk about the 60s, it's mainly the unrest, the social turmoil of the late 60s. And for Patterson, he's going to say that 1965 is the year where things really change quickly. So that'll allow us to read about the civil rights struggle, student movements, the free speech movement, anti-Vietnam. There's chapters in there about Vietnam, too, and about Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society programs. So it gives us a lot of insight into a lot of different things that are going on in that decade, even though it seems to be, on the surface, more narrowly focused on that one year. So that book you can order, online. We won't get to it until after, or right around spring break, I think, but you might as well get it soon. The new paperback is $13 for that one. You could probably find a used copy, for half that price, certainly. The other books too, they're all under $20, with the exception of the Schrecker History of McCarthyism, which the new version, the new one is $21. So if you buy it new at the bookstore, you'll pay a little more than $20. You can get a used book, used copy of that for under $10. All the other books, certainly used copies are available, and the new prices shouldn't be more than $15. So I try to keep it cheap, as I always do. Those of you who had me before, I don't want to ask you to buy a lot of expensive books, and certainly I always try to avoid textbooks in particular. So again, this is a 4-credit course. Even though it's a hybrid course, the workload is the same for a 4-credit course. If I'm totally honest, I think it's a little less than that because of the hybrid nature, but I tried to keep it close to a real 4-credit course, certainly. I did this as a hybrid course once before, 2 years ago, and the major problem that a lot of students seem to have, it was a much larger group of students too, which I think was problematic. There's 6 of you enrolled right now. Even if we get up to 7 or 8, that's still manageable. I had something like 20 in the hybrid course a couple years ago, and with the hybrid course, too many students seem to get lost. They would kind of forget about the fact that even though we weren't meeting, they had stuff to do for the day that was the online class of the week, and so they'd come back, or they wouldn't come back to the class where we're meeting in person the following week, and they would have already been a week behind because they hadn't done the stuff for the day we weren't meeting. It's, long story short, it's really important that you recognize that we meet on Mondays and you have work to do for the Monday class. We don't meet on Wednesdays, but you do have work to do for that day. If you didn't, the class would only be worth 2 credits, I imagine. So you're earning the 4 credits, you got to do the work for the day that we're not meeting. It's usually, as I said, a little bit lighter, I think. When you look at the syllabus, and we can go over this more on Monday, I think, in person, there are a few days that are a little heavy, but they're more than balanced out by the days that are a little bit light. And you'll notice that as you go through the whole syllabus. You're going to have assignments that include short responses that you'll post on Blackboard, as well as some online discussions. So this afternoon, I'm hoping I'll find the time to finally set up the discussion boards for you. I'll certainly have that ready to go in the next couple of days, if not today. And you'll see on the syllabus there are days where I say you do the reading and then you post your thoughts on the discussion board, and then you have to at least respond to one other posting as part of the assignment. There are other days when I don't ask you to use the discussion board. I ask you to simply submit a response through Blackboard. Those will be obvious as you look through the syllabus. I have my reasons for doing it this way. There's some days I'd rather collect your thoughts myself and bring those to class the next week, and we can talk about it from scratch rather than having you start the online conversation yourselves. You also have some major assignments. I mentioned the Schrecker McCarthyism paper that you'll write, and I'll give you more information about that soon. It won't be a major paper, but it'll be a short research paper. And then you're also going to have sort of a small-scale historiographical essay that looks at the other 3 books for the course, the Clark, Amsden, and Patterson books, and I'll give you more detail on that, but it won't be a major paper either. Trying to find my grading. I guess I need to put the grading more clearly on here because I can't find it. Importantly, though, the small assignments, the ones, either the discussion postings on Blackboard or your individual responses on Blackboard, I can't take those late. Those are set up to, get you to write something down before you come to class. If you don't do it before class, then there's not much point in doing it. I'm not looking for for you to post after class what you learned in class. I'm looking for you to post your initial responses to the readings. Plus, they're small assignments. They're not worth much individually. So if you miss one, you just miss one. And I don't want to get into a situation where you're trying to make up all the short, small assignments you missed in one fell swoop. So you can't turn those in late. The bigger assignments are different. Those papers, I've put deadlines for them on the syllabus, but those kind of deadlines are fairly arbitrary. I want them done roughly at that time. If I say that I want you to turn in the paper at the beginning of April, that's because I don't want you to get bogged down with stuff at the end of April, at the end of the semester. I want you to get that paper out of the way. But if you turned it in 5 days late, it probably wouldn't make much of a difference, as long as it's not 2 or 3 weeks late. So for the larger assignments, I have a much different attitude. In-class participation is also really important to me. We have a small group, which means we can have a nice seminar discussion on Mondays for a lot of these topics. So because we're only meeting once a week too, you gotta be there on Mondays. And, obviously if you're terribly sick, if you have some kind of family emergency, I understand. But for the most part, we only meet in person. How many weeks do we have together? 14 weeks, so 14 Mondays is all we have together. 14 classes, that's all I'm asking for you to be there in person. I don't think that's a lot to ask, so please be there for those 14 classes. So anyway, look at the syllabus carefully. Look through it, make sure you kind of understand, at least in a broad sense, how this works. You don't have to go through every day, but at least look through January and maybe the first week of February so you have a sense of what's coming up, what's going to be expected of you, where the readings are located, things like that, which books you need to buy immediately and which books maybe you could wait a week for if you need to for some reason. Today's assignment is to watch this video to make sure that you can access Blackboard and you know your way around. And then to watch the films that I posted links to for today, these Nazi concentration camp movies and the films that show the atomic bombs effects in Hiroshima. And, I'd like to start this way just to remind us before we get too far into the post-45 period that people in the late 1940s, you know, their worldview is very much constructed by the events of the 1930s, the Great Depression years, the New Deal, the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt, World War II, and of course the immediate aftermath that everybody's still kind of focused on is the discovery of the concentration camps, and General Eisenhower, amongst others, you know, orders that his men film and document these camps to make sure that the crimes against humanity of the Nazis are known to everybody. And so Americans are exposed, Americans and other people are exposed to these images, and I think it's important that we're exposed. As history students, we need to be exposed to these images too and understand what happened. I know you know what happened, but understand what happened in the same way, or as much as possible in the same way that people at the time understood what had just happened in the years before. Similarly with the atomic bombs, Americans were startled, to say the least, when they understood the magnitude, the power of the atomic bombs that were dropped in Japan. And an uneasy peace was the result, that there were celebrations, of course, to end World War II, but people also were apprehensive about the new atomic age, and that apprehension, of course, will continue well into the 1950s and 60s, arguably up through the end of the Cold War, probably. We need to try to understand that, right? We need to try to get in their heads, too, and at least looking at the films that were taken of Hiroshima and were shown to audiences in the United States gives us a little bit of a sense of how people understood the destruction and how they might have felt, how they might have reacted. We'll have to, you know, we have to guess, but we have to do that. So take a look at those films. You don't have to watch all of it. Certainly, they're they're very long. The Nazi concentration camps are many reels. Just pick some randomly if you want to, and kind of go through them and get a sense of what they were. And then don't forget that you have a separate assignment for Monday, right? That's the assignment for today. It won't take you all that long. There's no reading. It's just watching videos. But then for Monday's class, I do want you to read this chapter by William Tuttle, America's Children in an Era of War, Hot and Cold, which looks at children in the 1940s, children who and their experience of World War II, children and their experience of the early Cold War. And I find this to be an interesting way of getting into this period, to try to, again, imagine it through children's eyes. Because when we get to the 1960s and 1970s, the adults, when we talk about Americans, we generally talk about adults, and the adults we're talking about in these later decades, of course, were children in this period. And so, it's always worth kind of stepping back and trying to imagine not just what Americans were thinking, but what were children, young adults, older adults, the elderly, how are they experiencing these events that we're talking about? So let's start with children at the beginning of this course, and we'll go from there. And then you have a short writing response that you'll post on Blackboard based on that chapter, just imagining and then describing what childhood for Americans in the 1940s would have been like. Again, you're speculating, but you're speculating based on the evidence that Tuttle is presenting. So, we'll go over some other things, and I'll talk more about the two papers on Monday, give you a little bit more information about those if you want. There is a midterm, there's the final two. The midterm and final together are not going to be worth too much of your grade. The midterm especially will be more of a quiz than a real test. So I think that's it in terms of introducing the, kind of administrative stuff for the course. I will be in my office and out of my office today and tomorrow. That's Wednesday and Thursday of this week. You have my email address, of course, and you can contact me through Blackboard. My phone number, which is on the syllabus too, the office is 9989, extension 9989, or if you're off campus, 456-9989. I'm in building 2 on the far side of campus, in the basement in room 04. As you can see, behind me, it's a pretty bunker-like situation down here in the basement. It's also about 95 degrees, so if you need to warm up, come over and we'll have a chat, and you can get nice and warm. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions that need answering before Monday, I'll see you in class on Monday at 6 p.m. Thanks.